My forefathers didn't slaughter the Native Americans. My forefathers were just poor, innocent peasants. I have nothing to do with it. Innocent as can be. You want to take collective credit, but you want to individualize blame. But you'll say that Isaac Newton, for example, is a product of the West. Michelangelo was a product of the West. Mozart was a product of the West. Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, they're all products of the West. But somehow your villains are all bastards. Illegitimate children that you don't want to claim. No. Hitler was your child. King Leopold was your child. Harry Truman was your child, a man who killed more people in a matter of seconds than anyone in the history of the human race. And not to mention every American president after Truman. You know, from the Korean War to Vietnam to the dirty wars in Central and South America to Panama, the first and second wars in Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and before Truman. I don't think that the United States has had a single decade in its history when it wasn't slaughtering some people somewhere in the world.
Today, I'm diving in a video, a message from Shahid Bolsen. And this message exposes the arrogance and double standard of those who call themselves the West. Because when Shahid Bolsen said, you call yourself the West, it's not my term, it's yours. You call it Western, you call yourself, or you call it Western civilization, Western enlightenment, Western thought. You love to take control or to take credit as the West for what you call progress. But when it comes for accountability, when it comes for your atrocities, suddenly you don't know who the West is anymore. Family. This was one of the realest statements of our time I have heard from Shahid Bolsen, and I loved it. That's what I'm going to talk about. Okay? Because centuries, the West has operated with two faces. One face that shines bright with self-praise, calling itself the light of the world, the savior of the humanity, you know, the bringer of civilization. And another face, the one that hides, soaked in blood, exploitation, and deception. So when the West wants to bring, it says we. Okay? When the West wants to brag, it says we. We invented this. We bring democracy, we ended slavery, we gave the world freedom. But when the time of confrontation comes, when you confront them with the truth, when you confront them with the genocide of indigenous people, with the atrocities, with the transatlantic slave trade, with the colonization, with the apartheid, with the coups, assassinations, and the plan of Africa, suddenly that we disappears. And we call it double standard. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. But before I dive deep into my video, I want to watch this clip of Shahid Bolsen, and then we'll come back and talk more.
A number of comments have objected to you using the general term the West, and they want you to be more specific because there is no monolithic bloc called the West. It is an unfair generalization, they say.
You know, it's strange if you think about it. It's strange that you don't want me to call you the West. You don't want everyone to be lumped together under that term. It's not my term, it's your term. I didn't come up with it, you did. You call yourselves the West. Western civilization. We all grew up hearing about how wonderful the West is. Western achievement, Western thought, Western enlightenment. You're happy to take collective credit as the West for whatever you think is good. But for the bad things, you want to disassociate yourselves from it. When you're talking about the bad things, then you're like, whoa, what West are you talking about exactly? Who do you mean by the West? The way you people tell the story, people like Douglas Murray or Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, all these types, you would think that every European on the continent participated in painting the Sistine Chapel. Everyone painting in shifts. All of you collectively invented penicillin, from the telephone to airplanes, from the cotton gin to the microchip. You all did that as one gigantic team effort. We, the West, abolished slavery. We, the West, gave women the right to vote. We, the West, developed modern technology. You like being called the West then, but just bring up one, just one, of your innumerable atrocities. And then everyone starts looking around. Who, me? Oh, you must have me mistaken for some other person, some other West. Shaggy. It wasn't me. My forefathers didn't own slaves. My forefathers didn't slaughter the Native Americans. My forefathers were just poor, innocent peasants. I have nothing to do with it. Innocent as can be. You want to take collective credit, but you want to individualize blame. But you'll say that Isaac Newton, for example, is a product of the West. Michelangelo was a product of the West. Mozart was a product of the West. Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, they're all products of the West. But somehow your villains are all bastards. Illegitimate children that you don't want to claim. No. Hitler was your child. King Leopold was your child. Harry Truman was your child. A man who killed more people in a matter of seconds than anyone in the history of the human race. And not to mention every American president after Truman. From the Korean War to Vietnam to the dirty wars in Central and South America to Panama, the first and second wars in Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and before Truman. I don't think that the United States has had a single decade in its history when it wasn't slaughtering some people somewhere in the world. These are all products of Western civilization too. But anytime these crimes get brought up, you deny collective responsibility. I mean, if I try to list all of your crimes, I can't even remember them all. But if I try to list just the ones that I can remember, your battery will die before I can even properly get started. I saw a video the other day of Amr Suleiman. And he was asked by some lady, some woman, who asked him, why don't Muslims condemn acts of terror by Muslim criminals? And he was trying to be patient, his style. He was trying to be kind. He was smiling, a very forced smile. And he said, no, Muslims always condemn these things. But why don't you condemn when one of your people murders Muslims in a mosque? And of course he has a point, but also, of course they don't. Of course you don't condemn those things. You've got statues of Winston Churchill, who starved millions of Bengalis and who used poison gas on the Kurds. You not only don't condemn your terrorists, you not only don't try them for war crimes as they should be tried, you re-elect them into office. Not just elect them, re-elect them. And you deny any responsibility for their atrocities. No, if you want to be called the West, when it comes to any positive achievements, then you have to accept being called the West for all the full catalog of inhuman, vicious, genocide, murder, rape, torture, bigotry, exploitation, oppression, assassinations, coups and subjugation, evil and brutality, all that your people have ever committed. That's why I always say Western civilization is a sarcastic term, because you never civilized. And, we made cool stuff is not a defense. Your approach to morality is, let's not and say we did. Let's not be moral, but say we are. You think that righteousness is denying the evil you do, not stopping yourselves from doing the evil. As long as you say you don't do it, or you call it something else, then somehow you're not evil when you do evil, as long as you don't admit it. It's upside down world. Every day is backwards day in the West. Bad is good, wrong is right. It's no surprise that you think that a person should be called whatever pronoun they self-identify as, because that's what you've always believed. That's what you've always done. You self-identify as virtuous, as moral, as righteous, freedom-loving, tolerant people, even though you have never been that, and no one in the world sees you as that, but still you insist that that's what we call you. You insist that we deal with you as if that's what you are. You've always believed that the whole world should participate in your self-delusion. So of course you came up with this idea that a man should be called a woman and treated as a woman if he believes that that's what he is, or a woman a man. This isn't new with you. It's always been the way you believed. It's always been the way you functioned in the world. That you believed that you had the right to defy objective reality, and that your own victims had no right to define you, no matter what. You insist on your own blamelessness. And I'm telling you, how on earth do you expect to ever stop doing blameworthy things if you think that you are immune from blame no matter what you do? Yes, okay, your forefathers were probably poor peasants. I agree with you. They didn't participate in the crimes of the West. They didn't participate in colonization or imperialism. But then they also have no reason to take pride in the achievements of the West either, and neither do you. They were victims of the West in their own way, and so are you. If you want to disassociate yourself from the crimes, then disassociate yourself from the achievements, and realize that you and your forefathers and your ancestors were all abandoned and betrayed and duped by propaganda about Western civilization. No one ever cared about your development or your forefathers' development. No one ever cared about your welfare or your forefathers' welfare. No one ever cared about your upliftment or theirs. No one ever cared about your life. Not yours, not your forefathers, not your ancestors. And the West doesn't care about you now. But here you are defending it, like you have no self-esteem, like you have no pride. You and I both know the West doesn't care if you starve to death. They don't care if you get kicked out of your home and live on the streets. If you spend the rest of your life drowning in debt, they don't care. If you fry your brains on drugs, they don't care. And if you decide that life is too hard, they'll help you kill yourself. That's the West. And that's what the West thinks of you. The West didn't raise you right because you don't matter to the West. They don't care if you have knowledge. They don't care if you have an education. They'll pass you on up to the next grade whether or not you can read or write, because you don't matter. Every day of your life, your civilization all around you is shouting at you in a million different voices that you don't matter. You're just a replaceable cog in the machine. Everyone in the West is regarded as disposable by the West, and still you defend it as the pinnacle of human refinement. You need to break that spell because you're living in a trance of propaganda that's all designed to keep you oblivious to your own humiliation. But then you'll get mad at me for trying to tell you to break that spell, to break that trance. You'll get mad at me because I'm trying to tell you that you need to stop being humiliated. You need to stop aligning yourself with the ones who are humiliating you. You need to stop aligning yourself with the ones that were humiliating your forefathers and that are humiliating you now. And you're going to get mad at me. But you don't disassociate yourself. I'm supposed to disassociate you from them, but you're not. Why should I disassociate you from the West when you don't do it yourself? I'm trying to tell you that you need to break the trance. I'm trying to tell you that you need to break out of the propaganda. You need to break out of the indoctrination. You need to break out of the programming. But you're going to get mad at me for telling you that. And you want to hold on to the programming. You want to hold on to the indoctrination. And then while you're holding on to it, I'm supposed to separate you from the indoctrination that you're holding on to. So how are you supposed to change?
Welcome back. I've been using the term West. Why? Because I find it, the West, calling themselves the West. Okay? So, who created that name? Or who benefit from that name? Okay? The West wasn't created to describe geography. It was just Europe, or it's not just Europe or America. It is a political brand, a marketing wildly for global dominance. So during colonization, the West became a club of power built on a shared ideology, white supremacy, Christian expansionism, and economic control. So it was a collective identity formed to justify exploitation, okay? To paint the conqueror as enlightened and to make the conquered appear savage. So when Europeans divided Africa at the Berlin Conference in 1884, if I'm not wrong, that wasn't just Britain or France. That was the West acting as one. When America dropped bombs on Libya in 2011, that wasn't just NATO. It was the West enforcing its will. When IMF and World Bank policies crushed African economies in 1980s, it wasn't just individual country. It was the Western system maintaining economic slavery. Hapo juu nimepigiwa simu. Pause. Hello.
Unafanya kitu.
Niko kazi kidogo, sinimalize tu alafu nikupigie.
Sawa.
Nipe kama dakika 15.
Sawa.
Sawa. But after all those, the West have done this. But when you remind them of the collective power, of this collective power, they start playing dumb. They started asking questions. Which West are you talking about? That wasn't me. That was the British, or not the France, or all those. See, they only like the term the West when it makes them look noble. When it means all these atrocities, suddenly they disappear. Okay? When it's about Hitler, it's about Leopold, it's about Churchill, it's about Bush, it's about Reagan, they distance themselves. Okay? Now, they tell us that before European Enlightenment, the world was dark, ignorant, backward, and primitive. But history tells us otherwise. When Europe was deep in the dark ages, Africa had universities and Timbuktu. We had Fez, we had Cairo, we had Ethiopia. While they were banning women for witchcraft, Africa were performing advanced surgery, studying astronomy, and trading across continents. So when the West brags about its enlightenment, who really lit the torch? Who? Because even their scientific revolution was built on the knowledge that was stolen from Africa. The Middle East and Asia, when they discovered mathematics, it was because they stole algebra and geometry from Africa. Okay? So Shahid Bolsen cuts right through that arrogance. He says that you can't claim collective pride in what you call Western achievement while pretending that you are innocent of collective crimes that build that so-called civilization. The same ships that carried philosophers and to new land carried slaves in their bellies. The same empire that built university also built plantations. The same leaders that wore or that wrote about liberty also wrote slave codes. You enslaved millions for centuries, destroyed families, you destroyed languages, kingdoms. Then when you finally stopped, not that you stopped because of morality. No, you stopped because of economic pressure and rebellion. And now you want to be clapped for. That is like an arsonist burning your house to ashes, then coming back with a cup of water and saying that I helped put out the fire. Let's be real here. Slavery didn't end because the West became kind. No, it ended because the system evolved into a new forms of exploitation. And they replaced physical chains with economic chains. They moved from plantations to policies, from the whip to the lawn. And then they rewrote history books to say that we, the West, brought freedom. And that is what Bolsen is calling out. Shahid is calling out the manipulation of moral credit. The same goes for colonialism. They call it bringing civilization, but what civilization is built on blood? What civilization is that? What kind of enlightenment is based on erasing other cultures? This is form of a psychological warfare to convince the oppressed and to thank the oppressors. Now, let me talk about collective amnesia of the Western mind. Bolsen says something powerful. Bolsen says this, the way you people tell the story, you'll think that every European painted the Sistine Chapel, or that you all invented the airplane together. That line is very genius because it exposes the fantasy of Western unity, a myth of shared greatness. pigia saa hivi. But the same collective pride disappears when the topic becomes what? Becomes slavery, colonization, or genocide. It is moral amnesia, selective history. And that's why they can praise without Churchill, or they can praise Winston Churchill for saving Europe, but never talk about how we starved millions in India. They cannot talk. That's why they can praise Winston Churchill for saving Europe, but never talk about how he starved millions in India. They glorified King Leopold II as a builder of Belgium, but not a butcher of Congo. They honor Christopher Columbus as a discoverer, not as a murderer who wiped out entire civilization. Okay? And that's how the Western mind works. Collective credit, individual guilty. When it's good, it's us, it's we. When it's evil, it is he did it. He did it, you know? Now, we might say that why does it matter today? That was the past. Okay. But let me remind you this. It matters because the same hypocrisy continues. Today, Western powers still invade nations and call it spreading democracy. They impose sanctions and call it human rights. They control African currencies through the CFA franc and call it economic partnership. They exploit African minerals and call it foreign investment. It is the same system, just wearing a new suit. And whenever we speak about it, they say, don't generalize, that's not the West. But when we talk, or when they talk about Africa, they generalize freely. Africa is corrupt, Africa is poor, Africa is this, Africa is that, you know. So that's the double standard I'm talking about. And Bolsen's message reminds us that we must stop letting them dictate the language, because language is power. And the way they define themselves and us determine who looks like the hero and who looks like the villain here. Okay? Now, when they say the West, it is not just a term. It is an identity of superiority. It implies that everything outside of the West is the rest. The West did it, the rest did not did it. And that the rest must catch up, imitate, or depend on them. Okay? And that's why you hear a term like developed nations versus developing nations, versus first world countries versus third world countries. So these terms are not innocent. These are coded hierarchies. Okay? They tell you who is meant to lord or to lead and who is meant to follow. Okay? These terms aren't just innocent. They are coded terms. And the most dangerous part, even some Afrikaners, some Asians, some Latin Americans are starting to believe on that lie, that myth. We start saying some things like we want to be like the West. We want Western education. We want Western technology. We want Western democracy. As I was growing up, they was telling us, read hard so that you can be like Europe. You can be like the people from America. You can be from Germany. You can be like this and this. That is praising the West. Okay? Now, when Shahid Bolsen challenged the West hypocrisy, he is not just criticizing Europe or America. He is calling for global awakening. Okay? He is saying, stop believing the myth of moral superiority. Africa doesn't need the West to validate its greatness. We had civilization, we had empires, we had systems, we had philosophers. We don't need anyone. We don't need to measure our worth with their inventions, because their inventions came from our distractions. Okay? And the great scholar Dr. John Henry Clark said, the people who stole your history will also steal your future if you left them. Bolsen's message connect with that truth. The West uses collective memory as a weapon to glorify themselves and erase you. But when we knew our story, or when we know our story, we break the spell. we become invisible. When you know your story, you become untouchable. You become, I say, let me use this term. When you know your story, when you know your identity, you become courageous. You can face anything, you know? And there's another reason the West hates being called the West when it comes to crimes. Because collective responsibility means what? Means collective accountability. So if you accept that the West benefited from slavery or colonization or exploitation, then you must also accept that the wealth of your nations, the wealth of your infrastructure, your privilege are built on stolen labor and stolen lands. And that's why they resist it. Because if the West accepts its crime, the reparations becomes a global discussion. If the West admits its theft, then moral superiority collapses. If the West faces the mirror honestly, then their empire's foundation turns to dust. So instead, they rewrite history. Okay? They rewrite history. What they do, they separate good from evil to keep enjoying the benefit without facing the guilty. And that's why they say this. That's why they say it is in the past. Why are you thinking about this? But for us, the consequences of that past is still present up today. Our stolen wealth funds their banks. Our resources feed their industries. Our culture fuels their entertainment. Our pain sustains their power. Okay? But the awakening is here, kings and queens. We are waking up. The awakening has begun, and that's why voices like Shahid Bolsen are shaking the table. That's why Africans, African Americans, and people across the diaspora are rising to reclaim the narrative. So we are saying, no, you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to decide when the conversation ends. And no, we will not stop calling you out as the West. Because if it was the West that acted as one when it enslaved, colonized, and exploited, it was the West that acted like that. So we are not falling for selective morality anymore. We use or we see the system clearly. From Washington to London to Paris, it is still the same people. Okay? So let me say this. The wealth of Western world was not built by innovation alone. It was built again on the extraction of African resources and the enslavement of African people. Every major European empire, like Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, name them, all had one thing in common. Their rise depended on African suffering. Okay? Britain's industrial revolution was powered by cotton from slave trade, from slave plantation in America. French's infrastructure was financed by gold, rubber, and palm oil stripped from West and West Africa. Belgium wealth came from Congo's blood. Portugal empire thrived on Angola and Mozambique exploitation. America economic boom in the 18th and 19th centuries rested on slave labor. So today, these same nations preach to Africa about human rights, about democracy, about good governance. This is hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is so loud that silence became complicity. Okay? They call it civilization. But what kind of civilization is built on genocide? What kind of enlightenment used chains and whips to teach morality? What? So when Europeans invaded Africa, they said that they were bringing light. Which light? The light they brought burned everything in the path because we already had our own light. So the light they were bringing was fire to burn everything that we had. Okay? And this is what Chinua Achebe called the balance of stories. Okay? Because for too long, only one side told the story. The colonizer's side only. Okay? They told the world that Africa was savage and primitive. And that's why they justified the slave trade. They said colonization was a civilizing mission. That's why they justified plunder. And they said that they were spreading democracy. That's why they justified wars. Okay? But as Bolsen pointed out, they loved that collective identity when it was convenient. Okay? It was Western civilization when they were conquering, exploiting, and exploring. But it is different when it comes for crimes. Okay? Different countries, like Europe did this. America did, not Europe, America did this. Belgium did this to Congo. Now they are coming out from the name the West. Okay? As they term in generalize Africa, like Africa is like this, Africa is poor, Africa is primitive. Why are they feeling bad when we call them in a general word? Okay? When the chains of slavery broke and flag of independence rose, it looked like freedom. But the West had learned control doesn't need chains anymore. It needs contracts. And that's why neocolonialism was born. Kwame Nkrumah warned about it in 1965. He said that the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to its, in history, independent and has all the outward strapping of international sovereignty, but in reality it is economic system, and thus it is a political policy is directed from outside. That is the West's greatest magic trick, maintaining domination while pretending to have let it go. When you look at the IMF, when you look at the World Bank, the US dollar, CFA franc, all of these are just maintaining the dominance because they are still here. Okay? Now, they lend Africa billions with one hand. Then they take trillions with the other. Okay? They set policies that destroy local industries and demand privatization of public assets and impose debt that lasts generations. Okay? And when African nations struggle, they say that, why can't Africa develop? And they knew what they did. They knew what they did. What they are doing is not partnership. It is financial colonialism. Okay? Now here's where Shahid Bolsen words cut deepest. The hypocrisy of morality. The West claims to stand for human rights, democracy, and freedom, but their action exposes a different say. Okay? They bomb nations in the name of liberation. They sell weapons to both sides of conflicts. They act as mediators for peace. They condemn dictators, but only when those dictators stop serving Western interest. Okay? I'll say this as I finish. When we talk about, for example, when you talk about slavery or colonization, they say that is in the past. When we ask for reparation, they say we can't be blamed for what our ancestors did. But when we talk about the Western civilization, they happily include ancient Greeks, Romans. They are, they are joyful when you talk about that, saying that we did it. Okay? You see the trick? They choose when to be historical and when to be modern. You get that? They take pride in Plato, but no guilty for Leopold. They honor Churchill, but they bury his crimes. And then they expect us to feel gratitude for their systems, And that's why Bolsen critic cut dips. He is saying that stop letting them hide behind time and terminology. They want, or the West can say we when celebrating progress and they when facing truth. Okay? Now, across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, people are rejecting Western double standards. People are demanding fair trades, not charity. We are demanding respect, not lectures. Even within Western nations, young people are questioning the hypocrisy on their government. Okay? They are seeing the wars, the lies, the racism, and they are not silent anymore. And that is the awakening Bolsen words represent, a breaking of illusion. Because once the world stops believing in Western moral superiority, the empire collapses from within. Okay? And here's the most important lesson here. Exposing hypocrisy is not about hate. It's just about healing. Okay? We don't call out the West to destroy, but we call them out to hold them accountable, because only truth brings peace. But as Bolsen shows, they fear the truth more than anything, because as Bolsen said, they were on the comment section telling him, why are you calling the West? Be specific. Who is the West? Are you talking about England? Are you talking about France? Because truth will mean reparations. Truth means the end of white innocence. Truth means the fall of myth that called Western civilization. Okay? Now, family, this message is not about just Western era. It is for us, all of us, because we have to build the alternative. We have to build the alternative, okay? I hope you have listened to the message from Shahid Bolsen and my commentary. I think I'm doing great on what I'm presenting. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comment section. Until next episode, peace out.